People often ask me whether they should be studying the roots of words when they're learning vocab, and I don't think it's so much about roots as it is about just being flexible with the way that words kind of adapt to different parts of speech and different situations. So this is a good example of that. The recently observed gamma ray burst, whatever, lasted for 200 seconds, blank for a burst generated by the merger of neutron stars. Bursts caused by neutron mergers typically last fewer than 2 seconds. So I've definitely got a strong word there in typically, and I'm comparing 2 seconds to 200 seconds. So this seems to be kind of something like atypical, right? Atypical for a burst, meaning unusual. And there you go. We've already got a version of what I'm kind of talking about here is, can you take the word typical, which is not not a weird word, not a hard word, is a very common word that you would use every day, and turn it into this opposite, basically atypical. You know, we don't say untypical, we don't say dystypical, we say atypical. Why? I don't know. So is the root there the A that we put at the front? Well, basically, maybe that's the thing you need to study, but it's mostly, can you understand that when we use a word like atypical, we are still orbiting around the original meaning. In this case, it's an opposite. And the same thing is then going to go for our answer choice. We are looking for something unusual, an oddity. Now, oddity is not a word I'm using very often. I can't even imagine myself saying that even over the course of a year outside of like these kinds of questions, because I would just say something is odd. I use the adjective version. I'm not going to call it an oddity. For some reason, that just sounds very old-timey to me. It just sounds very 1800s, but it's a word, and I understand what odd means. Odd, unusual, atypical, right? And so we're just getting kind of like the noun form of that. Like you've got to be flexible enough that if you learn the definition of a word, when they change the part of speech or something, you're just still able to recognize it's the same word. That's really what I think this question is about. Now, none of the other choices make sense, right? It's not a coincidence. I mean, maybe it is a coincidence, but that's not what they're trying to say. They're trying to contrast these two different timings. An incident, of course it's an incident, something happens, but the word incident just means it's an event. There's nothing to that event. We need to say that it's an unusual event. And then reprieve, I think, is tempting because maybe we don't know what oddity means and we're stuck with two words. But I would hope that you'd be like, well, oddity kind of looks like the word odd. I'm just going to go with it. And reprieve, it doesn't necessarily look like anything else, but it is kind of like the word a relief. So if you get a reprieve, you get kind of like forgiven for something. So you kind of get relieved from that responsibility. So it's kind of similar looking, and honestly, it might be from the same root. I have no idea. I don't really learn roots of words because I've spoken English so long that I can recognize the patterns in words without needing to do that. But I also just memorize the definition. So it's up to you, whatever works for you to learn words. But I would say this is the first kind of tier of things that you've got to be able to accomplish, is when the SAT takes a word that you should have learned long ago and then just tweaks it slightly, puts it in a different part of speech. You have to still be able to recognize that it's a form of the word and that you do know the definition, even if you've never said or read the word oddity ever in your life.